In this video, we hear from Katrina Cunningham. Katrina is an academic development partner at the University of Stirling and also a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Her current research interests focus on internationalization and interculturalism in higher education, particularly its impact on academic identities. She was the project lead for the Embedding Equality and Diversity in the Curriculum Strategic Enhancement Programme project at Stirling, which focused on embedding interculturalism through a postgraduate certificate in learning and teaching in higher education. And it's that she's going to explore with us today. And with that, I hand over to Katrina.
Thank you, Pauline, and it's a pleasure to come and give you a bit more of an overview of this case study that was part of the Strategic Enhancement Programme. It's an area around embedding equality and diversity that focuses specifically on interculturalism, and is something I feel very, very strongly about and have enjoyed exploring it further with colleagues within my own institution, and I'm kind of thinking about what this means in terms of academic practice. So you can see from the first slide that what the attempt that what we were trying to do through this case study was to come up with an institution-wide shared understanding of what embedding interculturalism in the curriculum might look like. We wanted to embed it specifically in our postgraduate certificate in learning and teaching in higher education, which is comprised of 3 modules. We wanted to embed it specifically in the first module because this is the mandatory one for most new academic colleagues, a number of whom are international, and so are also new to higher education in the UK and in Scotland specifically. So I'm going to kind of talk through what the content that you see here. I'll talk through in the next 10 minutes. We started with focus groups, and we used the poem Connecting Cultures by Liz Lochhead, who was the Scots Macker, the poet laureate, if you like, of Scotland, and as a kind of way of talking about interculturalism, often with terms like equality and diversity, interculturalism, it's I think we can easily make assumptions about what these terms mean. They're also very grand terms that are bandied about, so rather than start cold with those words, the poem Connecting Cultures was a way of approaching the subject and allowing people to interpret it according to their own cultural, linguistic, disciplinary approach, really. So we ran these 4 focus groups initially before we started the pilot because we wanted to gauge where people were, what they were thinking, and how we could embed it most usefully in academic development here at Stirling, in learning and teaching specifically. Then we held an Intercultural Colloquium, which was based around 3 different think pieces, again as a way of moving the focus from the language onto actually thinking about what do these terms mean for me in my context. And that's very, very important for the approach that we take. We invited colleagues for academic colleagues from across the disciplines to this colloquium. We had some postgraduate students who were interested in this area, and we also had some of our professional services colleagues, for example, the equality and diversity people. We had our deputy head of policy and planning, again as a way of trying to encourage conversations across campus on this issue. And that idea of encouraging conversations across campus is key to what we are continuing to really strive for here at Stirling. The approach was then piloted in the Module 1 of the postgraduate certificate, which ran in the autumn, where interculturalism was used, and I'll talk more about this later, very much as I would say the kind of ethos or as the approach, as the pedagogy of our learning and teaching. The final thing that I'm not really going to talk about today, but I just wanted to flag up, was working with an undergraduate student on his final year placement module in psychology on developing a toolkit, and he went to pilot this on program leaders across disciplines. He piloted it on 5 different program leaders to see how they could, what they are doing already, how they understand the terms, and how we could really look at kind of embedding it not just in our own program, but in enabling others to really think about what they are doing in their programs too. So that was just to signpost that. So that's an overview of what we did and a little hint at where we might be going. I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about some of these things now. So this next slide is just to give you a little taster of the Connecting Cultures poem by Liz Lochhead. And really, the focus groups, what was important to us was that it wasn't just new academic colleagues, but it was also our teaching assistants, were one of the focus groups, and they are mainly postgraduates who teach. They have very interesting perspectives to offer, and they're very new to teaching, so they're very engaged and very keen to engage their students. We had our pre-pilot of the PG Cert cohort as well as our post-pilot, and this was important for us to enable an evaluation of how embedding interculturalism in the curriculum had changed the way people think, had enhanced their practice in this context. And finally, we had our focus group with, I would say, experienced colleagues in the sense that they were colleagues who were either working in the area of interculturalism, internationalizing higher education, colleagues who were very comfortable and familiar with some of the concepts and ideas. So that was important. As I said, I think a poem and indeed any kind of artifact is a useful way of talking about some of these big terms. It avoids imposing a definition on anyone. It enables individuals to interpret the language and the themes, and that's where a poem, which really goes into language, matters. And what it really aimed to do, and what I think we will keep on doing, is like I say, having conversations about what does this mean. So, for example, lingua franca, we had lengthy discussions in all the focus groups about whether we have disciplinary lingua franca, whether learning and teaching in itself is a lingua franca, and how we can translate what we do, how we can give people the language to be able to talk about what they do in a meaningful way, and that enables them to have conversations with others. That's very, very important. So they were the focus groups. This is just a little screenshot of our website in academic development at the University of Stirling. And Module 1, like I say, of this postgraduate certificate was where we piloted embedding interculturalism in the curriculum. We drew our inspiration from, we started with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's wonderful YouTube clip, The Danger of a Single Story. And really, this was to kind of highlight that actually interculturalism is a pedagogy that I said before, that I said at the start, this is the pedagogy that we use in our classes here in academic development. But really it's inspired by this idea that we have single stories, that single stories are problematic in that they only give us a small part of the picture. They are one story, and what we are doing in many ways in learning and teaching is bringing different stories to the table, different stories to the conversation. And in fact, it's almost become our mantra in academic development here. So is that his single story? That's my single story. It's an interesting one. By starting with the idea of a single story, we encourage your participants to then, so interculturalism is not just a one-off session within the module. It's very much the approach. And by starting here, it's really thinking about what's my story around learning and teaching, what's my story about my students, what's my story about me as a teacher, and how does sharing my story with people who have different stories, how does that help me think about my learning and teaching differently and enhance learning and teaching. And I think certainly in the conversations and that we had both during the classes but also in the evaluation in the focus group at the end of this pilot, which was with a very small number of participants, but they were using this language. They were talking very much about assumptions and being very careful that they articulate those assumptions to their students so their students can contextualize themselves and their teachers, and that's very important for enabling them to become responsible for their own learning, as well as enabling them to engage with one another, which in a diverse classroom is key to the learning process, we believe. So the single story is almost the thread that weaves the pedagogy through our teaching. We also use the single story and the danger of a single story and this YouTube clip specifically as a formative assignment. So we asked our participants to, as a blog post, to write down what their single story of learning and teaching is, and that was very interesting for them to do themselves in terms of their own critical reflection, but also in terms of their own of learning from one another and of sharing these stories. And we didn't ask them to share them this time in the pilot. We've decided for next year we're actually going to encourage participants to use our website to publicize and publish their single stories and really again take that thread and pull it more visibly through. That's very important. If you haven't already looked at this clip, I would strongly recommend doing so. It's very, very powerful and explains clearly what we're trying to do. This quotation in a way tries to define what we mean by interculturalism as a pedagogical approach. And this idea of actively and explicitly enabling, encouraging, provoking learners to kind of think about what their assumptions are and to begin to unravel those assumptions with others as well as with themselves, to bring in other perspectives is key. And we are very much taking our definition inspired by the embedding equality and diversity in the curriculum model that Pauline Hainsworth and her colleagues have devised and indeed written about at length. And I think this is where interculturalism becomes a very visceral aspect of equality and diversity, because it's not about identifying a specific protected characteristic. It's not about universalizing difference either. It's very much saying that there are all sorts of differences at any given time in your classroom. In our classrooms, we have our own differences, and that these can be disciplinary, linguistic, cultural, whatever, but actually what's important is acknowledging that they exist and knowing what they are to enable the learning to happen, to move beyond, to move into the friction of learning and move into something very meaningful. That's powerful. So the tools, and I use this word with a certain amount of discomfort, but the tools are almost the hooks, the harnesses that we use to kind of, again, embed this intercultural approach. So actually, it's about the group, it's about the dynamic, it's about the individual stories, it's about the conversations. Back to this word, the conversations again, that can make it very powerful, we would argue. In my final slide, I just wanted to look at actually where we're going, following on from our pilot, and these ideas are really a result of discussions in the focus groups, of the Intercultural Colloquium, of our pilot, and also of discussions within the team in academic development as well. So what we really want to do is use this as the pedagogy for our learning and teaching, and we want to be very explicit about this going forward. In order to do that, we would like to draw more widely on the institution again and really think about our definition of what that means and ensure that our approach is evidence-based. So I haven't talked about the literature in this presentation, but the whole ethos again is drawn on the literature around internationalizing higher education, around internationalization at home, around equality and diversity, and that's very, very important. This isn't an intuitive approach. It's very much based in the evidence that we have and in the evidence that the pilot threw up, which is that this is helpful, this is meaningful, this enables intercultural communication to happen in our classes. We'd also like to, by taking it back into the Stirling University community again, think about how we use the different contexts in which we learn, so that it's not just about an ethos, a pedagogy in the classroom, it's also about what's happening outside the classroom, in our campus, in our campuses or in our partnership campuses in different parts of the world. How can this enable us to go forward? And we were very pleased to see that in our equality impact outcomes, interculturalism is explicitly mentioned as something we are all striving for. That's great. We also want to see how we can draw more widely on the digital world as a way of really embedding it. In order to kind of gather everyone together, we believe that it would be useful to have a set of principles that define and describe what this will look like in Stirling. It was clear from the colloquium that this must be written in a language that is not top-down, but that is written by the staff and students who work at Stirling collectively, and that it can affect change. So this is not a strategic document that will sit there as a kind of visible driver for the university. It's much more active and much more meaningful for individuals, arguably, in the institution. In order to do that, we must include the student voice more widely, and that's currently what we are aiming at doing. We've co-created this toolkit with our undergraduate student, but we would like to really bring in the diversity of our students here at Stirling and have them contribute to that. So that's what we're aiming to do in the autumn semester 2017. And also, again, what came across quite strongly from the colloquium and from the focus groups is how can we create an institutional-wide module around interculturalism, and that this would be something that might be useful to build into induction for both staff and students, and that would be based on those principles for embedding interculturalism in the curriculum in Stirling. What is clear is that this kind of initiative is very, very contextualised. So what has worked for Stirling, what will work for Stirling will be different in another institution, and understanding that institutional culture is as much part of interculturalism as anything else. I'm going to stop there. Please read the case study and get in touch if you have any further questions, comments. It would be lovely to hear from people out there who are doing similar work, particularly in different parts of the world. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Katrina. And as Katrina says, if you do want to read more or hear more about her work, then I advise you to look at the connected case study to this video. And also, you'll see on that case study Katrina's email address, and as she said, she's more than happy for you to email her to find out more, to share ideas, and to share experiences. Thank you for listening.